Good day everyone. Today we will be discussing health, wellness, and illness. Health, wellness, and illness have many definitions and interpretation. A nurse should be familiar with this concept and consider how they may be individualized for their specific client. When we care for our patients, we have to pay attention to the different factors that might affect how client would take up our plan of care. So this plan of care has to be age-specific, case-specific, so that we can provide holistic nursing care. By the end of this discussion, you should be able to clearly differentiate the concepts of health, wellness, and illness, compare major models of health, use in nursing, identify factors affecting health status, beliefs, and practices, and of course, be able to describe the dimension of wellness and define illness according to nursing and health science perspectives. So before we start discussing health, let me ask you, what is your own definition of health? What's your personal definition? Why am I asking this? Because for most people, the general population would say being healthy means you do not have any signs and symptoms of diseases. And usually being healthy means you are not experiencing any pain at all. While another usual response of people when asked about what is health for them is that the client would say they are active and they can do what they want or what they must do. While some people would say being healthy means being in good spirit most of the time, meaning they have a good outlook at present, which means they are healthy. When most people think about health, they equate it with being free from disease, pain, or any physical problem. While this is partly true, it is actually the most traditional and narrow way to view health. Florence Nightingale viewed health as using every power the individual has to the fullest extent. This early nursing definition already recognizes that health is not only the absence of disease, but also a person's ability to reach their fullest developmental and behavioral potential. According to the American Nurses Association, they emphasize that health is holistic and includes biological, emotional, social, cultural, and spiritual well-being. While the World Health Organization mentioned that health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This modern definition highlights that health is multidimensional and not just simply biological. Walter Cannon introduced the concept of homeostasis, which refers to the body's ability to maintain stability despite internal or external changes. When stressors, injury, or illness challenges this balance, the body's compensatory mechanism try to restore normal function. Adequate adaptation means health. Inadequate adaptation leads to diseases. This concept is foundational in nursing because we assess how well a client adapts to any stressors. Let's look at two excellent clinical examples, your blood glucose regulation and your blood pressure regulation. This will help you understand how negative feedback maintains internal balance. Blood glucose regulation is one of the clearest examples of negative feedback mechanism. After we eat, blood glucose rises. The pancreas detects this increase and the beta cells release insulin. Insulin acts like a key that helps the glucose enter our cells and also signals our liver and muscles to store excess glucose as glycogen in the form of the process called glycogenesis. These actions gradually lower your blood glucose back to its normal range for about 70 to 110 milligrams per deciliter. On the other hand, during fasting or long periods without food, blood glucose falls. The pancreas detects low glucose and the alpha cells releases glucagon. Your glucagon signals the liver to break down glycogen in the process called glycogenolysis and even produce new glucose called in the process gluconeogenesis. This raises blood glucose back to normal, so insulin lowers your blood glucose and then your glucagon raises it. These two hormones work like a seesaw to keep glucose levels stable, an excellent demonstration of homeostasis. In case of dehydration, sodium deficiency or hemorrhage, this will eventually result in loss of body fluids and electrolytes. This condition reduces the amount of circulating fluid in the body. Because of this fluid loss, there is a decrease in blood volume, meaning less blood is available to circulate throughout the blood vessels. The reduced blood volume leads to a decrease in blood pressure as there is insufficient fluid to maintain adequate vascular pressure. Now, on the side of rapid neural response, the baroreceptors detect this lesser stretch. They signal the brain to increase their sympathetic activity. Your heart rate and contractility rise, and blood vessels constrict to raise blood pressure. Meanwhile, the juxtaglomerular cells of the kidneys detect the drop in blood pressure and reduce renal perfusion, signaling that the body needs to restore circulatory stability. In response, your JG cells releases renin. Renin is an enzyme that initiates your renin-angiotensin-aldosterone system. Renin acts on angiotensinogen, an inactive protein continuously produced and released into the bloodstream by your liver. Through this action, angiotensinogen is converted into angiotensin 1, a biologically inactive precursor hormone. As angiotensin 1 circulates through your lungs, it encounters ACE. ACE is angiotensin-converting enzyme located in your pulmonary capillaries. ACE converts angiotensin 1 into angiotensin 2, a potent and active hormone responsible for increasing blood pressure. Angiotensin 2 stimulates your adrenal cortex, signaling the need for hormonal regulation of fluid and electrolyte. In response, the adrenal cortex releases aldosterone, a hormone that targets your kidneys. Aldosterone acts on the renal tubules, causing increased reabsorption of sodium and water, while promoting increased excretion of potassium and hydrogen ions into the urine. As sodium and water are retained, blood volume increases, improving circulatory volume and cardiac output. The rise in blood volume leads to an increase in blood pressure, which continues until normal blood pressure levels are restored. Simultaneously, angiotensin 2 causes vasoconstriction of your arterioles, narrowing your blood vessel and further elevating your blood pressure. An increase in potassium levels in your extracellular fluid also stimulates the secretion of aldosterone, ensuring potassium balance is maintained. Together, this neural and hormonal mechanism demonstrate how the body maintains blood pressure within a safe range, again, using the negative feedback mechanism to restore balance. Understanding homeostasis helps us see that human body is always regulating and adapting. In the same way, health itself is understood through several models that describe how people define, maintain, and respond to health and illness. Let us now examine these models. To help us better understand this perspective, several conceptual models of health were developed. These include the 4 models proposed by Smith, the Level and Clark Agent-Host Environment Model, the Health-Illness Continuum, the Health Belief Model, and one of the most familiar frameworks to students, you have Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Let us look at each of these models and see how they shape the way we view illness, health, and wellness in nursing practice. Smith's model of health, or the clinical model. This is the simplest and narrowest model. It defines health as the absence of signs and symptoms of disease. A person is considered healthy if they are not sick. However, this model is limited because someone can appear disease-free but still feel unwell emotionally or socially. Like say for example, a 20-year-old student with no fever, no cough, normal blood test says, "I'm healthy because I'm not sick." Or like say for example, a smoker with early lung damage still believes he is healthy because he feels fine. So what's the point in this? Patients in this model, when look at this model, only seek care when symptoms appear. Next would be the role performance model. In this model, health is the ability to fulfill one's roles in societies, such as being a student, a parent, or an employee, for example. A person may have illness but still be considered healthy if they can function well in their roles. Like, take a look, for example, a mother with mild hypertension consider herself healthy because she can still take care of her children, work, and do household tasks. Or like say a student with migraine still goes to school because I need to attend class. So the point here is that some patients ignore health problems as long as they can still function with their task on hand. Next is your adaptive model. This model defines health as the ability to adapt positively to physical and social stressors. When adaptation fails, illness results. Nursing interventions promote clients' adaptive responses, which aligns with many nursing theories, such as, say, for example, Roy's adaptation model. So one good example to cite to narrate this model is like, say, a patient with diabetes who successfully adjusts their diet, exercise, and medication is considered healthy because he adapts well. Or like an elderly client who loses mobility in his right arm learns to use his left arm independently. So the focus here is on coping, adjustment, and compensation. Next, you have your Daymonistic model. In this model, this is the most holistic. Health is seen as the ability to achieve one's highest potential or self-actualization. Illness is anything that prevents personal growth. So this aligns with the humanistic theories like Maslow and Rogers. For example, a young adult without disease but who feels empty and unfulfilled does not feel healthy. Or like say, a cancer survivor says she is healthier now than before because she has purpose and emotional or spiritual wellness. So the point here is illness is anything that prevents personal growth. Next, we proceed with Leavell and Clark's agent-host-environment model or the ecologic model. This ecological model explains how disease results from an imbalance among the three interacting factors, the agent, the host, and the environment. When these are balanced, health is maintained. When something disrupts the balance, disease occurs. This model is the foundation of epidemiology and community health nursing. Like say for example, dengue infection. The agent there is your dengue virus. The host is the child with low immunity, and the environment is like the urban area with stagnant water, which is the perfect site for breeding mosquito. A change in any of this produces or prevents disease. Other example could be your COVID-19, no? So the agent there is your SARS-CoV-2. The host is the unvaccinated adult, and environment could be a crowded indoor area. Next, we proceed with health-illness continuum. This continuum visualizes health as constantly changing. We move back and forth between high-level wellness and illness based on our choices, stress levels, environment, and support system. It reminds patients that health is not a fixed state but a dynamic process. Like say for example, a nursing student across an entire second semester. Like say for week 1, you feel very energetic, you're eating healthy, that means you're at your high-level wellness. Okay? And by the time the midterm hits, you'll encounter stress, lack of sleep, reaching you to neutral zone. And then like say for example, you experience flu and anxiety, you're now at the illness zone. Okay? Recovering, exercising would move you back towards illness. So the point here is that health changes daily. It is not static. The health belief model according to Rosenstock. This model helps explain why individuals decide to take or not take health actions. People respond based on their perceived susceptibility, perceived severity, the different benefits, and the different barriers. These are 4 factors that affects or a person can consider first before taking actions to maintain their health. Perceived benefits refers to a person's perception of the effectiveness of various actions available to reduce the threat or illness or disease, or maybe to cure the illness. Perceived barriers refers to a person's feelings on the obstacles to performing a recommended health action. It may be like say for example, expensive, dangerous, like the different side effects when taking a medication, unpleasant, maybe painful, it may be time-consuming or inconvenient for him to follow. Perceived susceptibility refers to a person's subjective perception of the risk of acquiring an illness or disease. Okay, this is sometimes referred to as personal vulnerability to a disease. Perceived severity. This refers to the feelings on the seriousness of contracting an illness, or leaving the disease untreated. This is the wide variation in person's feelings of severity, and often a person considers the medical consequences like say death or disability, social consequences like how it affects the family life or social relationship when evaluating the severity. Like say for example, a 45-year-old father deciding about hypertensive medication. The perceived susceptibility can be like say my father died of stroke, so therefore I am at risk. Okay? The perceived severity like stroke can paralyze me. The perceived benefits could be taking my medications can prevent complication, while the perceived barriers can be as simple as the medicine is expensive in the first place. Okay, so the person now would weigh the benefits versus the barriers. So if we feel that the benefits outweighs the barriers, no, so he would take the medication. But then again, if he feels that the barriers outweighs the benefits, he stops taking it. So we use this model in patient teaching, behavior change, and health promotion. Okay, so we let the patient see the pros and cons of any treatment on hand, and we let them decide on this. Maslow's hierarchy of needs is next. This hierarchy reminds us that basic physiological and safety needs must be met first before a person can focus on psychological growth and self-actualization. This guides us in nursing prioritization, care planning, and patient motivation. Like say for example, a patient admitted with pneumonia. The physiologic needs can be oxygen therapy, hydration, rest, okay? Safety can involve infection control and fall precautions. Love and belongingness could include family visits, emotional supports, mechanism. Esteem refers to or can include encouragement, participation in care decisions, and then self-actualization can be setting recovery goals and regaining life purpose after a disease. Understanding health begins with three essential concepts. Health status, which describes a person's actual level of wellness or illness. Health beliefs, which shapes how they perceive health threats. And health behaviors, which are the daily actions people take in response to those beliefs. These three elements influence how a variety of internal and external factors affect a person's overall health. Several internal and external factors interact to influence a person's overall health status, and these key determinants help us understand why individuals experience health differently. Let's start with, on internal factors, we have a biologic dimension. This can be your genetic factors. A person's genetic makeup influence their susceptibility to certain diseases, such as like say diabetes or breast cancer. You have gender. Some health conditions occur more commonly in one sex than the other. Like say for example, osteoporosis and rheumatoid arthritis are more common in women, while stomach ulcers and respiratory diseases occur more frequently in men. Age, like the risk for diseases changes with age. For instance, measles and whooping cough are common in children but are rarely seen in older adults. Then you have developmental level. Developmental stage affects vulnerability, like say infants have immature defenses, toddlers are more prone to falls, and adolescents often engage in risk-taking behaviors. Then you have psychological factors like your emotional state that influences your physical health. Like say for example, extreme anxiety before an exam can cause diarrhea or frequent urination. Cognitive dimension or the intellectual factors like beliefs, lifestyle choices, and religious or spiritual values shape health behaviors such as like your diet and adherence to treatment. For external factors, we have like say your physical environment or like geographical location. Climates affects disease distribution such as like say malaria being more common in tropical regions than in temperate climates. Socioeconomic status, okay, like your income influence health access to hygiene, nutrition, and healthcare. Okay? Low-income families may prioritize basic needs over medical care. Family and cultural beliefs, like your family's pass on habits, coping patterns, and health beliefs such as like using herbal therapies or perpetuating unhealthy cycles like abuse. Okay? Then you have social support networks. Having supportive family members, friends, or co-workers reduces stress and enhances overall health and well-being. Now let's proceed with adherence. Adherence refers to how closely a person follows medical or health advice, such as taking medications correctly, following diet plans, and maintaining lifestyle changes. People may fully adhere, partially adhere, or not adhere at all, and this depends on several personal, social, and treatment-related factors. Like say for example, different factors affecting healthcare adherence can be number one, motivation, where a patient is more likely to follow health advice when they are internally motivated, feel ready to change, and believe that the health behavior will benefit them. Low motivation often results in skipped medications or inconsistent lifestyle practices. The degree of lifestyle change required, adherence decreases when the recommended change requires a major shift in daily life, like quitting smoking, eliminating your favorite foods, and like say, exercising daily. The harder the adjustment, the lower the likelihood of consistent follow-through. Perceived severity of the problem. If a client believes that the illness is serious, such as like viewing hypertension as dangerous, they are more likely to adhere. If they think the condition is mild or harmless, they may ignore treatment and medications. Value placed on reducing threat of illness. Clients who strongly value health or feel complications tend to follow medical advice. If a person does not see the future consequence as important, adherence declines. Difficulty in understanding or performing the required behavior. If instructions are confusing or the person has low health literacy, like misunderstanding dosage, diet plans, or techniques, adherence naturally decreases. Clear communication improves adherence dramatically. The degree of inconvenience of the illness or its regimens. Treatment that disrupts your routine, like say frequent clinic visit, multiple daily medication, may reduce adherence. The more time-consuming or inconvenient the regimen is, the harder it is to maintain. Complexity, side effects, and duration of the proposed therapy. Therapies that may include many steps, unpleasant side effects, or long treatment duration discourages adherence. Patient stops taking medication when side effects feel worse than the illness. Cultural or religious beliefs that may affect adherence. Some clients' cultural practices and beliefs may conflict with medical advice. For example, preferring herbal medicines or remedies, avoiding certain foods, or believing illness must be treated spiritually. These beliefs influence whether they follow or reject medical care. Relationship with the healthcare provider. So the clients are more likely to adhere when they trust the provider, when they feel respected, and they receive clear explanation. Poor communication, judgmental attitude, or lack of rapport decreases adherence. The cost of the treatment, of course. High costs of medication, follow-up visit, diagnostic tests makes it difficult for clients to adhere consistently, especially with those who have limited financial resources or without insurance. Understanding these factors reminds us that adherence is not just about patient discipline. It is shaped by motivation, beliefs, abilities, relationship, culture, and resources. As nurses, these influences helps us support our clients more effectively and design care plans that they can realistically follow. Now that we understand how health status, beliefs, and behaviors influence a person's overall well-being, we can shift our focus to wellness, a broader, more proactive concept that emphasizes intentional choices and daily actions that help individuals reach their highest level of functioning. Wellness is more than simply being healthy. It is a dynamic, lifelong process of making intentional choices that promote well-being. It involves self-responsibility, daily decision-making, and striving towards one's highest potential. As we talk about wellness as a lifelong intentional process, it naturally leads us to the concept of well-being. While wellness describes the choices we make, well-being reflects how those choices are experienced. It is our subjective sense of vitality and feeling well, but it can also be objectively described, observed, and measured along a continuum. In other words, wellness is the practice, and well-being is the lived result. Now that we understand well-being as a state of vitality and overall functioning, we can look at the different areas that shapes it. These are well-known dimensions of wellness, each one contributing to a person's total state of health. Physical dimension is the ability to perform daily activities, maintain fitness and proper nutrition, and avoid harmful substances while practicing healthy lifestyle habits. While social dimension refers to the capacity to build meaningful relationships, communicate effectively, and interact positively within one's environment. The emotional dimension refers to the ability to manage stress, recognize and express emotions appropriately, and maintain psychological resilience. Meanwhile, the intellectual dimension refers to the ability to think critically, learn continuously, and use knowledge effectively for personal and professional growth. The spiritual dimension is a sense of purpose and connection to values, beliefs, or a higher meaning, whether grounded in nature, philosophy, or religion. The occupational dimension of wellness is the ability to find satisfaction and balance with one's work and home roles, fostering personal fulfillment and healthy relationships. And lastly, the environmental dimension of wellness refers to the ability to maintain a safe, healthy environment by avoiding hazards, promoting clean surroundings, and supporting practices that protect the natural world and the community well-being. With the wellness framework in mind, we now shift to illness, a subjective experience of reduced functioning that differs from the objective nature of disease. Illness is a personal, subjective experience of not feeling well. It reflects how a person perceives and responds to challenges in their personal, physical, social, or spiritual functioning, even when no measurable pathology is found. Disease, on the other hand, is a measurable alteration in body structure or function. It involves identifiable signs and symptoms, laboratory or diagnostic abnormalities, and may reduce functional capacity or shorten lifespan. The cause of a disease is known as the etiology. Having clarified the difference between illness and disease, the next step is to understand that illnesses vary widely in duration and impact. In nursing, we commonly categorize them as acute or chronic, which helps guide the type of care and support patients will need. Acute and chronic illnesses differ not only in duration but also in how they affect a person's daily life, coping mechanism, and nursing care needs. Here are some examples to illustrate the difference. Acute illness is characterized by severe symptoms of relatively short duration. Symptoms often appear abruptly but they subside quickly and may or may not require intervention by healthcare professional. Examples of acute illness can be influenza that is manifested by sudden fever, body aches, and cough lasting for days to weeks. Another example could be appendicitis, a rapid onset of abdominal pain requiring urgent treatment. While chronic illness usually lasts for an extended period, they usually has a very slow onset, often have periods of remissions and exacerbations. Care includes promoting independence, sense of control, and wellness. Chronic illness example can be hypertension with long-term elevated blood pressure requiring ongoing medication, and diabetes mellitus it is characterized by lifelong metabolic disorder requiring continuous management. Parson in 1979 described that when a person becomes ill, society gives them certain rights and responsibilities. This guide how people should behave when they are sick and how others should treat them. So they have the rights and the obligations. Right number 1, the sick patients, they are not to be blamed for being sick. Even if their behavior contributed to their illness, like smoking leading to lung cancer, the person is not expected to cure themselves. Illness removes personal blame because the person is now physically limited. Number 2, they are excused from normal duties. When someone is ill, they are not expected to perform their usual roles. Like say for example, a parent with flu is not expected to cook or do housework. A student with dengue is excused, of course, from school. However, if they have rights, they also have different obligations. Number 3 is their first obligation. As sick people, they must try to get well. The sick person should cooperate with treatment, resting, taking medication, or following dietary examples, because society expects them to work towards recovery. And number 4, they must seek appropriate help. They or their family should consult a qualified health provider and not only to rely on self-treatment. Like say a person with chest pain should seek medical care instead of ignoring the symptoms. So technically, to summarize, being sick gives a person the right not to be blamed and to step away from normal responsibilities, but they must also try to get better and seek proper care. Psychologist Edward Sackman described illness as a process people move through, not just a medical condition. These are the 5 stages of illnesses according to Sackman. Number 1, symptom experience. The person notices something is wrong, like there is pain, fatigue, cough, or fever. They may try to interpret the symptoms, ignore them, or self-treat. Like say for example, a patient feels chest discomfort but assumes it's just stress. So the idea there is the patient already feels something is wrong. Stage 2 is the assumption of the sick role. The person decides they are ill and accept that they may need help. They may rest, miss work, or seek advice from family or friends. Example, they stay home from work because they believe they are sick. Number 3, medical care contact. The person receives or seeks personal help for diagnosis and treatment. They look for validation of their illness and guidance on what to do. Like say for example, visiting a doctor to confirm whether the chest pain is serious. Stage 4, dependent client role. The person accepts the diagnosis and follows the treatment. They depend on healthcare providers for care, support, and direction. Like say for example, taking the prescribed medication, being hospitalized, or undergoing different tests. And lastly, stage 5, recovery or rehabilitation. The person gradually regains independence and returns to normal roles. They adapt to changes in full recovery if full recovery is not possible. For example, returning to work after treatment, or adapting lifestyle changes, or undergoing rehabilitation. Now that we have outlined the stages a person typically goes through when experiencing illnesses, it is important to recognize that these stages don't happen in isolation. As individuals move through each phase, illness creates real emotional, behavioral, social, and even financial impacts, both on the client and on their family. Let us look at how illness affects daily functioning, relationship, and overall quality of life on the client side. Illness affects clients in multiple ways. It may cause behavioral and emotional changes such as irritability, anxiety, or withdrawal. Many clients also experience loss of autonomy because they can no longer perform usual activities independently. Some illness may alter a person's self-concept and body image, especially when appearance or functioning changes. And finally, illness often requires major lifestyle adjustments such as modifying diet, activity, or daily routines. The impact, meanwhile, of illness on a family varies depending on 3 key factors. First is which family member is ill. The effects are different when the breadwinner, a child, or an elderly member becomes sick. Second is the seriousness and duration of the illness. Long-term or life-threatening condition places greater emotional, financial, and caregiving strain on the family. And finally, Cultural and social customs shape how they respond to illness. Some families rely heavily on extended support system, while others face the burden more individually. So families are also affected when a member becomes ill. They may face role changes, task reassignments with other members taking over the client's responsibility. Illness increased time demands and often creates stress and uncertainty about the outcome or the future. It may lead to say financial strain, and for some, feelings of loneliness or social isolation as routines and social activities are disrupted. Before we end the lesson, let us take a moment to check your understanding of the key concept we had discussed. I will give you a short formative quiz, just few questions to help reinforce your learning and to see whether our lesson objectives have been met. Answer them at your own pace. Alright, which model emphasizes a person's ability to perform social roles like student, worker, or parent as the criterion for health? A. Clinical model, B. Role performance model, C. Adaptive model, or D. Eudaimonistic model. So let us practice the elimination method. Option A, clinical model focuses on the absence of disease, not the roles. So we can eliminate that. Option B, role performance model defines health as the ability to fulfill expected roles, like that of a student, worker, or parent. So I like to keep that. Option C, the adaptive model, focuses on coping and adjustment. So I'd like to eliminate that because it doesn't mention anything about performing social roles. Option D, eudaimonistic model, focuses on self-actualization, not roles. So our answer is letter B. The role performance model defines health by the ability to perform social roles. The clinical model focuses on absence of disease. The adaptive model on coping, and eudaimonistic on self-actualization. So our correct option is letter B. Wellness is a static state that once achieved remains unchanged unless disease occur. A. True. B. False. Alright. Statement claims that wellness is static, but wellness, we believe, is dynamic and changes daily with choices in life circumstances. So, the answer is letter B. Because wellness is a continuous process, not a fixed state. So, it is dynamic and ongoing. A patient prefers herbal medicine and home-based healing rituals instead of the prescribed medication plan. Which factor influencing adherence does this example best represent? Okay. A. Financial limitation. B. Complexity of treatment. C. Severity of illness. Or D. Traditional health practices. Again, let us practice elimination. Letter A. Financial limitation. There is no indication that cost is an issue on the situation, so we can have that eliminated. Letter B. Complexity of treatment. The example does not describe therapy difficulty. It describes a preference for traditional methods, so we can have that eliminated. Next, severity of illness. The client's choice is based on preferred healing approaches, not illness severity. Lastly, the clients often follow long-standing health practices passed down with their family or community, such as using herbal medicines, home remedies, or spiritual healing rituals. So I'd like to keep that. And the answer, of course, is letter D. These traditional practices can strongly influence whether a person follows a medical treatment plan. Today, we clarified the distinction among health, wellness, and illness, explored the major models of health, and examined the internal and external factors that influence an individual's health status, beliefs, and behaviors. We also identified and discussed the dimensions of wellness and provided a clear definition of illness as a personal subjective experience. With this discussion, we have successfully met our learning objectives for this session. Remember, as nurses, we assess both objective disease and